The transport ship rattled as it descended through the atmosphere of Kepler 9, and Lisa Morgan gripped the armrest, while her two dragons pressed against her legs, sensing her nervousness through their bond, because this was supposed to be a fresh start, far from Earth and far from the people who called her kind abominations. The other passengers gave her wide berth as they always did, because her pointed ears and silver hair marked her as genetically modified, and the two scaled creatures at her side made even the bravest travelers uncomfortable. Though Ember and Frost had never hurt anyone who did not attack first, Lisa had spent her entire savings on this colony transport, because the Outer Rim worlds did not ask questions about genetics or origin stories, and Kepler 9 was listed as uninhabited, which meant she could finally build a home without neighbors complaining to authorities about her unusual pets. The landing was rough, and the captain barely grunted a farewell, as Lisa gathered her belongings and led her dragons down the ramp into the pale purple twilight of an alien world, because this planet orbited a binary star system that painted the sky in colors Earth had never seen. She walked for hours across rocky terrain following the coordinates she had purchased from a data broker, because there was supposed to be an abandoned research station here with working power generators and water recyclers, which was all she needed to start her new life. Ember clicked softly and Frost rumbled in response because both dragons had sensed something before Lisa did, and she stopped walking to scan the horizon with her enhanced vision, which was another gift of the genetic modifications her parents had given her before birth. The research station appeared intact from the outside, but as Lisa approached she noticed scorch marks on the walls, and several windows had been blown outward from inside, which suggested this place had not been abandoned peacefully. But she had nowhere else to go, and night was falling fast on this world. Inside the station, the air was stale but breathable, and emergency lighting flickered on as her presence triggered motion sensors throughout the corridors, because whoever had left this place had done so in a hurry, leaving equipment and personal belongings scattered everywhere. Lisa chose a room that had once been crew quarters and spent the next hour making it livable, while Ember and Frost explored the station with the curiosity of young dragons who had spent too long cooped up on transport ships because they were barely 3 years old, which was still children by dragon standards. Though they were already the size of large Earth horses, she was unpacking her food supplies when both dragons returned with their scales bristling and their eyes glowing. That particular shade of violet that meant they sensed danger, because dragons could perceive things humans could not, including shifts in dimensional energy and distortions in space-time. The station suddenly shook with impact, and alarms began screaming throughout the corridors as something large struck the outer hull, because this abandoned station was apparently not as forgotten as the data broker had promised. Lisa ran to the control room with both dragons flanking her, and when she accessed the external cameras, her blood went cold because 3 massive warships hung in orbit above the station, and their weapons were charging for another strike. The communication system crackled to life without her touching it, and a harsh alien voice filled the room speaking in Galactic Common, which Lisa had learned during her journey because anyone traveling the Outer Rim needed to understand the language of trade and threats. The voice belonged to Commander Zyrax of the Vrelian Empire, and he demanded she surrender immediately because this research station was on Vrelian territory and she was trespassing on military property. Though his tone suggested he was more interested in her dragons than in property rights. Lisa tried to explain she had purchased legal coordinates and had no idea this was military space, but Zyrax cut her off with a laugh that sounded like grinding metal, because Vrelians found human excuses amusing, and he informed her that her dragons would make excellent specimens for their war beast program. Something changed in Lisa at those words, because she had spent her whole life running from people who wanted to use her dragons as weapons or study subjects, and she was tired of running and tired of being pushed around by beings who thought might made right. She told Zyrax no in a voice that surprised her with its steadiness, and she explained that Ember and Frost were not beasts or specimens but her family, and she would die before letting anyone take them. The commander seemed genuinely shocked that a human would refuse a direct order from Vrelian military, because in his experience, humans were weak creatures who bent easily under pressure, but he recovered quickly and gave her one final warning before he would board the station. By force, Lisa looked at her dragons, and they looked back at her with those intelligent eyes that held more understanding than most humans gave them credit for, because the bond between dragon and rider was not slavery or simple pet ownership, but genuine partnership built on trust and mutual respect. She had never asked Ember and Frost to fight for her because she had raised them to be free creatures who could leave whenever they wanted, but now they pressed against her sides, and she felt their determination through the bond because they had chosen to stay, and they had chosen to protect their human. The first boarding pod hit the station with enough force to crack the hull plating, and Lisa heard the sounds of Vrelian soldiers cutting through the airlock doors with plasma torches because they were coming, and she had perhaps 5 minutes before they breached the control room. She spent those minutes not preparing weapons or barricades, but instead sitting on the floor with her dragons and pressing her forehead against each of theirs in turn, while whispering the words, her grandmother had taught her, which were the old phrases from Earth before the gene wars when humans still believed in magic. The bond between them deepened and strengthened until Lisa could feel what they felt and see what they saw, because this was the true power of dragon riders, which was not domination, but unity. And in that unity they became something greater than the sum of their parts. The airlock doors exploded inward, and 12 Vrelian soldiers poured into the control room with weapons raised and armor gleaming under the emergency lights because they expected an easy capture of one small human and her exotic pets. What they got instead was a nightmare beyond their comprehension, because when Ember opened his mouth, reality itself twisted and bent as he released a wave of compressed dimensional energy that turned 3 soldiers into scattered atoms before they could even process what was happening. Frost moved like liquid shadow, phasing partially out of normal space as she had been taught, and her claws, which could extend into higher dimensions, sliced through Vrelian combat armor as though it were paper. Because dragon claws did not obey the normal rules of physics, Lisa stood between her dragons with her eyes glowing, the same violet as theirs, because in this moment of perfect unity, she could see what they saw, which was the underlying structure of reality itself, and all the weak points where it could be torn or folded or twisted. The remaining soldiers tried to retreat, but the airlock doors had been sealed by the station computer responding to commands Lisa did not remember giving, because apparently her connection to the dragons now extended to electronic systems, and the station itself had become an extension of their will. Commander Zyrax watched from his flagship as the camera feeds from his boarding team went dark one by one, and he felt something he had not experienced in decades of military service, which was uncertainty, because humans were not supposed to be capable of this kind of resistance. He ordered his weapons officer to prepare a full barrage that would destroy the entire station, because if he could not capture the dragons, then he would ensure no one else could have them. But before the order could be executed, something appeared on his view screen that made his tactical officer gasp in shock. Lisa stood on the outer hull of the research station in hard vacuum without a pressure suit, and she was breathing normally, while her dragons flanked her with their scales shimmering with colors that should not exist because they had wrapped her in a bubble of altered physics where normal rules did not apply. She looked directly at the flagship cameras and spoke words that traveled across space without radio transmission, because the dragons were carrying her voice through dimensional shortcuts that bypassed normal physics. She told Zyrax that she had not wanted trouble and had only sought a quiet place to live, in peace. But since he had attacked her home and threatened her family, she was giving him one chance to leave and never return, because the next time Vrelian ships entered this system, they would not survive the encounter. The commander was a warrior, with 50 years of service and hundreds of victories, and his pride would not allow him to retreat from a single human, no matter how strange her powers. So he gave the order to fire every weapon at once. The dragons moved before the weapons discharged, and they did something that should have been impossible, because they folded space itself, creating a tunnel between the research station and the flagship that bypassed all shields, and Armor Lisa and her dragons appeared on the bridge of the Vrelian command ship, and the crew froze in terror because nothing should be able to teleport through military-grade shields, and certainly not while bringing passengers along. She walked up to Commander Zyrax, who stood twick. 3 weeks passed after the Vrelian encounter, and Lisa spent that time fortifying the research station and teaching Ember and Frost new techniques, because she knew the peace would not last, and when the Empire returned, they would come prepared. For dragon abilities, the station had extensive databases that previous researchers had left behind, and Lisa discovered they had been studying dimensional physics and exotic matter, which explained why Vrelians wanted this location, because the binary star system created natural rifts in spacetime that could be harnessed for weapons research. She adapted some of the research notes to better understand her dragon's abilities, because while she knew they could manipulate reality, she had never fully understood the mechanics of how they did it, and knowledge would be crucial for survival. Ember had grown slightly larger in just 3 weeks, and his scales now shimmered with red and gold patterns that shifted like flames, while Frost had developed ice blue markings that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, because dragons were not static creatures, and they evolved rapidly in response to challenges. The bond between Lisa and her dragons had also deepened since the battle, and now she could sometimes see through their eyes even when they were kilometers away, and she suspected they could sense her emotions and thoughts with equal clarity. Though neither dragon had learned human speech, she was reviewing security footage from the perimeter sensors when the station computer alerted her to incoming vessels. But these were not military warships, because the signatures showed civilian transports and small cargo haulers. Lisa watched nervously as 6 ships entered orbit and began broadcasting friendship signals in multiple languages, including Earth Standard, which she had not heard since leaving her home colony months ago. The lead ship requested permission to land, and the captain introduced herself as Kelly Davidson, from Earth Colony 7, which was the same colony where Lisa had been born and raised. Though she did not recognize the name, Kelly explained over the communication channel that word of Lisa and her dragons had spread throughout human space, and many families who had also been genetically modified were facing increased persecution because authorities feared they might also bond with dangerous creatures. Lisa felt her stomach drop because she had not considered that her actions might have consequences for others, and she asked Kelly what they wanted from her. The captain's response was simple and direct, because the 6 ships carried 43 families who had fled Earth colonies before they could be arrested or forced into government research programs, and they were seeking sanctuary with the only human who had proven she could defend against galactic military forces. She wanted to refuse because she barely knew how to take care of herself, and 2 dragons, much less protect dozens of families. But then she remembered how alone and frightened she had felt growing up as a modified human, and she could not turn away people who faced the same struggles. Lisa granted landing permission and spent the next few hours meeting families who had risked everything to find safety, and many of them had children with pointed ears and enhanced abilities, though none had dragons, because those eggs were rare and expensive. Among the refugees was a woman named Claire, with her teenage daughter, Amy, who both had the same silver hair as Lisa, and Claire explained they had escaped just days before security forces raided their home because neighbors had reported them for genetic violations. There was also an older man named Henry who had been a xenobiology professor until his university discovered his modifications and revoked his position, and he brought with him extensive knowledge of alien species and their biological capabilities. Lisa realized she was no longer alone, and while that brought comfort, it also brought responsibility, because these people were looking to her for protection and leadership, which were roles she had never wanted or trained for. She called a meeting in the station's largest room and explained honestly that she could not promise safety because the Vrelians would return and other species might also see them as threats. But if they chose to stay, she would do everything possible to help them defend themselves. The families voted unanimously to stay because they had nowhere else to go, and even the risk of attack was better than the certainty of persecution they faced in human-controlled space. Henry approached Lisa after the meeting with an interesting proposal, because during his years as a professor he had studied reports of dragon-like creatures on several frontier worlds, and he believed it might be possible to find more eggs if they knew where to look. She was hesitant, because bonding with dragons required specific genetic modifications, and even then success was not guaranteed. But Henry argued that among 43 families, there were likely several individuals compatible with dragon bonding. Lisa agreed to consider it, and that night, she discussed the idea with Ember and Frost, through their mental connection, because she would not seek more dragons without their approval, since they would essentially be adopting siblings. Both dragons responded with curiosity rather than jealousy, and Frost sent images through the bond, showing a memory of the nest where she had hatched and the feeling of loneliness before Lisa found her. The next morning, Lisa announced they would mount an expedition to find dragon eggs, and Amy volunteered immediately with an enthusiasm that reminded Lisa of herself at that age. Henry had identified 3 potential locations within reasonable travel distance, and the closest was a moon called Taros that orbited a gas giant in the neighboring star system, because survey reports mentioned large, reptilian creatures with unusual energy signatures. Lisa selected a team of 8 people, including herself, and they took one of the refugee transports that had been modified with better shields and weapons because frontier space was dangerous even without considering hostile military forces. The journey to Taros took 4 days, and during that time, Lisa trained the team in basic combat techniques and explained what little she knew about dragon behavior, because finding eggs was only the first challenge, and surviving angry parent dragons was often more difficult. Taros was a harsh moon with extreme temperature variations and an atmosphere that was barely breathable, but sensors detected life signs in a network of caves near the equator, where geothermal vents provided stable warmth. They landed near the largest cave entrance, and Lisa led the team inside with Ember and Frost scouting ahead, because if there were dragons here, they needed to approach carefully and respectfully. The beer. Caves were vast and beautiful with crystal formations that glowed with bioluminescence, and the team followed a trail of claw marks that suggested large creatures regularly traveled this route. They found the nest in a cavern that seemed to exist, partially outside normal space because the walls shimmered with colors that hurt to look at directly. And in the center of the cavern lay 7 eggs each, the size of a human torso. Lisa approached slowly with her hands visible and empty because she could sense a presence watching from the shadows, and she suspected the parent dragons were nearby and deciding whether to attack or allow them to proceed. A massive dragon emerged from a side tunnel, and it was easily 4 times the size of Ember, with scales that shifted through multiple dimensions, making it difficult to focus on directly. Lisa did not run or reach for weapons. Instead, she sat down on the cave floor and sent peaceful thoughts through her bond with her dragons, hoping the parent would sense them and understand they meant no harm. The ancient dragon studied them for several minutes that felt like hours before making a decision, and it sent a pulse of mental energy that Lisa felt like a physical impact because this was a test of worthiness. Images flooded her mind showing the history of dragons across multiple worlds and dimensions, and she saw how her species had once bonded with these creatures before the gene wars and genetic modification had been developed to recreate that ancient connection. The parent dragon showed her visions of the future, both the terrible possibilities where dragons were enslaved and used as weapons, and the hopeful paths where humans and dragons lived as true partners, protecting the weak and opposing tyranny. Lisa understood this was an offer and a warning because the eggs were being given freely, but only if she promised to teach the new riders the old ways and ensure dragons remained free beings who chose their bonds rather than being forced. She accepted the responsibility, aloud speaking her oath to the ancient dragon, while her team watched in awe because they were witnessing something that had not happened in thousands of years. The parent dragon touched its nose to Lisa's forehead, transferring knowledge directly into her mind, and she learned the proper techniques for hatching eggs and nurturing young dragons, and recognizing which humans were compatible for bonding. When the transfer ended, Lisa was exhausted, but the team carefully gathered 5 eggs, leaving 2 for the parent, because removing all the eggs would be disrespectful, and dragons needed to maintain their own populations. The return journey was tense because they were transporting priceless cargo, and any number of species would attack to steal dragon eggs, but Ember and Frost flew alongside the transport in open space, using their dimensional abilities to survive the vacuum. The 20 Vrelian warships formed an attack formation in orbit, and Commander Zyrax broadcast a message that echoed through every speaker in the colony because he wanted everyone to hear his ultimatum. He gave them 1 hour to surrender unconditionally and turn over all dragons and dragon eggs, or he would reduce the entire settlement to molten slag, and none of the 70 families would survive to see another sunrise. Lisa stood in the makeshift command center surrounded by frightened colonists, and she knew many of them were questioning whether following her here had been a mistake, because they had fled persecution only to face annihilation. Claire spoke up first, suggesting they negotiate because surely the commander would accept the eggs in exchange for letting the families leave safely. But Lisa shook her head, knowing Vrelians did not negotiate from positions of strength. Henry proposed using the research station defensive systems, but a quick inventory showed they had perhaps enough firepower to damage one frigate before being destroyed, and there were 20 warships including that massive dreadnought. Amy asked the question everyone was thinking, which was whether Lisa and her dragons could possibly defeat such overwhelming force, because 2 dragons, no matter how powerful, seemed insignificant against a fleet that could crack planets. Lisa closed her eyes and reached through her bond to Ember and Frost, and she felt their absolute confidence and willingness to fight. Because dragons did not calculate odds or worry about survival, they simply protected their chosen humans without hesitation. But she also felt something else through the connection, which was a presence that had not been there before. And when she opened her eyes, she saw the ancient dragon from Taros materializing in the center of the command room. The colonists gasped and backed away, but the dragon sent a wave of calm reassurance because it had followed them across space using dimensional pathways that only the oldest dragons knew. And it had not come alone. Through the command center windows, Lisa saw rifts opening in space and more dragons emerged, each one ancient and powerful, and they circled the colony in a protective formation that made the Vrelian fleet suddenly seem less intimidating. The ancient dragon communicated directly with Lisa, mind showing her that dragons across multiple worlds had been watching humanity for centuries, and they had seen how humans treated weaker species with both cruelty and kindness. These dragons had chosen to intervene now because Lisa represented a turning point where humanity could either become another tyrannical empire or something better, and they would help her defend the colony as a test of human worthiness. Lisa felt overwhelmed by the responsibility, but she accepted it because she had made promises to these families and to the dragons, and she would not break those promises even if the entire galaxy united against her. She contacted Commander Zyrax directly and informed him that he should withdraw immediately because the situation had changed, and continuing his attack would result in the destruction of his entire fleet. The commander laughed at her warning, because from his perspective he still held all the advantages with 20 warships and hundreds of soldiers against a small colony and a few exotic creatures. Lisa gave him one final chance to retreat peacefully, and when he refused, she nodded too. The ancient dragon and the battle began in a way that would be studied by military historians for generations. The dragons did not charge at the warships or engage in traditional combat. Instead, they opened dimensional rifts that connected each ship engine core to the heart of the nearest star, and for 3 seconds superheated plasma flowed backward through those portals. 15 warships exploded simultaneously as their containment fields failed and their reactors overloaded from the massive energy influx, and the 5 remaining ships, including the dreadnought, found their shields completely bypassed. Commander Zyrax stared at his tactical display in horror as 3/4 of his fleet was simply erased, and he finally understood that he was not facing animals or even advanced weapons, but beings that existed partially outside normal physics. He ordered the remaining ships to retreat at maximum speed, but the ancient dragon was not finished because this commander had threatened children and families, and such crimes required punishment, not mercy. The dreadnought found itself suddenly encased in a bubble of frozen time where nothing could move or change, and it would remain there until the dragons decided to release it, which might be days or centuries depending on their judgment. The other 4 ships escaped only because Lisa asked the dragons to let them go, because she wanted witnesses who could carry word of what happened to anyone else who might consider attacking human refugees. The battle was over in less than 5 minutes, and the colony erupted in celebration. But Lisa felt no joy, because she understood this victory would have consequences far beyond one Vrelian fleet. The ancient dragon communicated that it and the others would remain nearby to protect the colony, while Lisa established proper defenses and trained new dragon riders, because this world would become important in the coming conflicts. Over the next month, the colony transformed dramatically, as the ancient dragons taught Lisa and other compatible humans the deep secrets of dragon bonding, and 3 of the 5 eggs hatched, each choosing their rider in the mysterious way dragons had. Amy bonded with a female dragon she named Star because its scales sparkled like starlight, and the connection between them was immediate and profound. And watching Amy laugh with pure happiness while Star nuzzled her made every danger worthwhile, Claire bonded with a male dragon called Storm, whose scales shifted between gray and purple, and who had a calm, steady presence that matched Claire's personality perfectly. Tyler bonded with a dragon he named Shadow, because it could phase completely out of normal space, becoming invisible even to advanced sensors, and the combination of Tyler-enhanced reflexes and Shadow stealth abilities made them formidable scouts. The two remaining eggs had not hatched yet because they were waiting for the right humans, and Lisa was patient because forcing a dragon bond was impossible and trying would only result in rejection. Word of the battle spread across the galaxy even faster than the first encounter, because the destruction of 15 warships simultaneously was impossible to hide, and every species wanted to know how humans had acquired such devastating power. Some species sent diplomatic envoys offering trade and alliance, because they recognized strength and wanted to be on good terms with this new power. Others sent spies trying to steal dragon eggs or learn the secrets of bonding, because they wanted that power for themselves without understanding that the bond could not be forced or stolen. The Vrelian Empire convened an emergency council session because they had lost a fleet to a colony of refugees and their military pride demanded response, but their strategic analysis showed that attacking again would likely result in worse losses. A faction within the Vrelian government proposed something unprecedented, which was offering peace and recognition to the human colony, because continuing hostilities served no purpose when the enemy could manipulate space-time itself. Commander Zyrax was recalled to the homeworld and faced court-martial for losing his fleet, though he argued passionately that no commander in the Empire could have won against enemies who bypassed every known defensive system. The court eventually ruled that Zyrax had acted appropriately given the information available, and the real fault lay with intelligence services, who had grossly underestimated human capabilities. Meanwhile, on Kepler 9, Lisa was dealing with different challenges because the colony population had grown to over 200 families, and resources were becoming scarce despite efforts to establish agriculture and mining operations. Henry proposed that they needed to trade with other species because isolation would eventually lead to starvation, and they had something valuable to offer, which was protection services for species too weak to defend themselves against predators. Lisa was uncomfortable with the idea of hiring out dragon riders like mercenaries, but Henry explained they would not be fighting for profit, but rather defending those who could not defend themselves, which aligned with the values the ancient dragons had taught. They sent out carefully worded messages to nearby systems offering assistance to colonies facing pirate raids or aggressive expansion from larger powers, and the response was overwhelming because half the galaxy lived in fear of species like the Vrelians. The first contract came from a mining colony of Balerians, who were being extorted by a criminal syndicate that demanded protection payments and threatened violence when refused. Lisa took a team including Amy and Star because the young rider needed experience, and Tyler with Shadow would provide reconnaissance, while Ember and Frost stayed to defend the main colony. The criminal syndicate was operating from an asteroid base that was heavily fortified with stolen military weapons, and they had a fleet of 12 ships crewed by mercenaries from multiple species. Lisa attempted negotiation first because she preferred solving problems without violence, but the syndicate leader was a Korthax warrior who believed humans were weak prey species, and he mocked her for thinking she could threaten his operation. She gave him the same warning she had given Commander Zyrax, which was one chance to leave peacefully. But like the Vrelian commander, he refused because he did not believe the stories about reality-warping dragons. The treaty negotiations with the Vrelian Empire took 3 months, and during that time Lisa discovered that galactic politics were far more complicated than she had imagined, because every clause and condition had implications that rippled across dozens of star systems. Ambassador Corva proved to be genuinely committed to peace, but she faced fierce opposition from military factions within the Vrelian government who saw any compromise with humans as weakness and betrayal of Empire values. Lisa spent hours in video conferences with Vrelian officials explaining that her colony wanted coexistence, not conquest, and that dragon riders would defend themselves, but had no interest in territorial expansion. The breakthrough came when Lisa proposed a practical demonstration of how human dragon rider protection could benefit the Empire. because Vrelian merchant ships were constantly harassed by pirates in the frontier sectors. She offered to provide escort services for 3 Vrelian trade convoys as proof that cooperation served both species' interests, and if the arrangement worked, both sides would sign the formal treaty. The Vrelian High Council accepted the proposal because they had nothing to lose and potentially much to gain. If human dragon riders could secure trade routes that Imperial military forces struggled to protect, Lisa assigned 3 teams to the mission because escorting convoys through dangerous space required experienced riders, and she chose Amy with Star because the young rider had proven herself capable in previous operations. Tyler and Shadow would scout ahead, identifying threats before they could ambush the convoys, and another team led by Claire with Storm would handle any combat situations that developed. The first convoy departed from Vrelian space carrying luxury goods and technology, bound for neutral worlds, and the journey would take them through the Kresh Nebula, which was notorious for pirate activity. Lisa accompanied the mission, aboard the lead merchant vessel, and spent the journey getting to know the Vrelian crew, who were initially suspicious of human presence, but gradually warmed when she asked genuine questions about their culture. The captain was a veteran named Thrax, who had served 40 years in merchant fleet, and he explained that pirates had grown bold recently because they knew Imperial warships rarely patrolled this far from core worlds. Lisa asked why the Empire did not provide better protection, and Thrax laughed bitterly, explaining that military resources were stretched thin. Maintaining occupation forces on conquered worlds and protecting trade routes was low priority. They were 3 days into the journey when Tyler and Shadow reported detecting a large pirate fleet assembling in a nearby asteroid field, and the energy signatures suggested at least 20 ships preparing to intercept the convoy. The Vrelian captain immediately proposed turning back because his ships were not equipped for combat against such numbers, but Lisa told him to maintain course and trust the dragon riders. She contacted the other teams, and they deployed in a coordinated formation that put dragons between the convoy and the approaching threat while maintaining enough distance to maneuver freely. The pirate fleet emerged from behind several large asteroids, and their leader broadcast a demand for the convoy to stop and transfer all cargo or face destruction. Lisa responded by identifying herself and the dragon riders, and she explained that this convoy was under protection and attacking would be extremely unwise. The pirate leader was a human from one of the independent colonies, and he laughed at her warning because he recognized genetic modification markings and assumed she was just another refugee pretending to be dangerous. He made a crude joke about training exotic pets and ordered his fleet to open fire on the merchant ships to demonstrate he was serious about his demands. Amy and Star reacted, first creating a temporal barrier that slowed the incoming weapons fire to a crawl, giving the convoy time to adjust shields and defensive positions. Tyler and Shadow phased into the pirate flagship bridge and disabled their weapons control systems before anyone could react because shadow dimension infiltration was impossible to defend against. Lisa and her dragons appeared in open space between the fleets, and Ember released a pulse of dimensional energy that temporarily disrupted the pirate ship's engine systems, causing them to lose propulsion. The pirate leader suddenly realized he had made a terrible mistake because these were not ordinary humans with trained animals, but the dragon riders whose reputation was spreading across the frontier. Lisa gave him one chance to withdraw peacefully, and to her surprise he accepted immediately because he was a practical criminal who understood when to retreat and fight another day. The pirate fleet limped away with damaged systems and bruised pride while the Vrelian convoy continued safely to its destination, and Captain Thrax looked at Lisa with newfound respect. He told her that in 40 years of merchant service, he had never seen pirates back down without extensive combat, and the dragon riders had accomplished in minutes what would have taken Imperial warships hours. The second and third convoy escorts went equally smoothly, with only minor pirate harassment that was quickly discouraged, and word spread through the frontier that Vrelian ships with dragon rider escorts were not worth attacking. Ambassador Corva contacted Lisa with barely contained excitement because the convoys had arrived safely and delivered their cargoes without losses, and the merchant guilds were already demanding that the Empire secure permanent escort arrangements. The Vrelian High Council voted to approve the peace treaty with surprisingly little opposition because even the military faction could see the practical benefits of cooperation and the final document was more generous than Lisa had hoped. The treaty recognized Kepler-9 colony as sovereign human territory and guaranteed that no Vrelian forces would enter the system without explicit permission. It also established mutual defense provisions where both sides would aid each other against external threats and created trade agreements that gave the colony access to Vrelian markets and technology. Most importantly, the treaty included protections for smaller species in Vrelian-controlled space because Lisa had refused to sign unless the Empire agreed to stop exploiting weaker civilizations. The signing ceremony was broadcast across the galaxy and showed Lisa standing beside Ambassador Corva, while Ember and Frost flanked them, representing the partnership between humans and dragons. But the treaty also created new problems because other species watched with alarm as humans gained formal recognition from a major galactic power, and some saw it as the beginning of human imperial ambitions. The Korthax Dominion, which had lost face when their criminal syndicate fled from dragon riders, began building a coalition of species opposed to human expansion. They argued that humans with reality, warping creatures were too dangerous to exist freely and should be contained or eliminated before they became an unstoppable threat. Meanwhile, on Kepler-9, the colony continued growing as more refugees arrived, and now they also received visits from diplomats and traders from dozens of species. Henry organized a proper government structure because the colony could no longer operate as an informal community, and they needed laws and procedures for handling disputes. Lisa reluctantly accepted the role of planetary governor because the colonists insisted they needed leadership, and she was the only person that everyone trusted, though she made Henry her primary advisor. The colony now had 15 bonded dragon pairs, including several new riders who had arrived specifically hoping to bond with the remaining eggs. One of the new riders was a young woman named Dana, who had been a shuttle pilot before genetic discrimination cost her license, and she bonded with a dragon named Wind whose scales were translucent like crystal. Another was an engineer named Victor who specialized in dimensional physics, and his dragon called Void had the unique ability to create stable wormholes that could transport objects across vast distances. These new abilities expanded what dragon riders could accomplish, and Lisa began organizing specialized teams for different types of missions, whether combat or exploration or rescue operations. The colony also started construction on proper cities with buildings designed to accommodate both humans and dragons because the research station had become inadequate for the growing population. Ancient dragons still visited regularly to teach and guide the young riders, and they brought eggs from other nesting sites because they saw Kepler-9 as a sanctuary where dragons could live freely. Lisa was reviewing construction plans when urgent messages arrived simultaneously from 3 different sources, and all contained essentially the same warning. The Korthax Dominion had assembled a coalition fleet of over 100 warships from multiple species, and they were heading toward Kepler-9, with the stated intention of eliminating the Dragon Rider threat. Ambassador Corva sent word that the Vrelian Empire would honor their treaty and send military support, but their nearest fleet was 2 weeks away and the coalition would arrive in 5 days. The ancient dragons communicated that they would defend the colony, but they also sensed something troubling, which was that this fleet carried weapons specifically designed to disrupt dimensional manipulation. Lisa called an emergency council meeting and laid out the situation bluntly because the colony faced its greatest threat yet, and they needed to decide whether to evacuate or make a stand. The aftermath of the battle brought profound changes to Kepler-9 and to the broader galaxy, because the coalition defeat proved that human dragon riders could not be eliminated through military force. Lisa stood in the memorial garden they had created to honor those who died defending the colony, and she felt the weight of every life lost because this victory had come at terrible cost. 23 people had died during the battle, including 5 dragon riders and their bonded companions, because when a dragon died, the rider often followed within hours from the trauma of severed connection. Amy had survived, but Star bore terrible scars from anti-dimensional weapons that had struck during the final hours of combat, and the young rider spent every moment caring for her injured dragon. The allied species who had sent ships to help also suffered losses, and Lisa made sure their sacrifice was recognized in the memorial, because without their support, the colony would have fallen over. The following weeks, representatives from dozens of species arrived to discuss forming a permanent alliance because the battle had revealed that small civilizations could defend themselves if they worked together. Henry suggested they formalize the arrangement as the Frontier Defense Coalition with membership open to any species that agreed to mutual protection and respect for sovereignty. The proposal met enthusiasm from smaller species who lived in constant fear of aggressive empires, and within 3 months over 40 civilizations had joined the coalition. Lisa was offered leadership of the coalition, but she declined because governing Kepler-9 was already more responsibility than she wanted, and she suggested they establish a rotating council instead. The council would include representatives from member species, and major decisions would require majority approval, which meant no single species could dominate the organization. The Vrelian Empire surprised everyone by requesting associate membership in the coalition because Ambassador Corva argued that recent events showed cooperation was more profitable than conquest. Many coalition members opposed, including such a powerful empire. But Lisa supported the proposal because having Vrelian military strength on their side would deter other aggressive powers. The compromise was that Vrelian Empire could join as associate member with full responsibilities, but limited voting rights until they proved genuine commitment to coalition principles. Meanwhile, Dragon Rider training had become formalized as more eggs were located and more compatible humans arrived. Seeking bonds, Lisa established an academy on Kepler-9 where potential riders learned not just combat techniques, but also the philosophy and ethics that ancient dragons taught. The curriculum emphasized that dragon bonds were partnerships based on mutual respect, and that riders served as protectors, not conquerors or exploiters. Amy became one of the academy instructors despite her young age because her experience in battle and her deep connection with Star made her an excellent teacher. Tyler took on responsibility for advanced stealth and reconnaissance training because shadow dimensional phasing abilities were difficult to master and required specialized instruction. The colony itself had grown into a proper city with residential districts and commercial zones and even entertainment venues because people needed more than just survival. They needed community. Ancient dragons helped design structures that accommodated both humans and dragons, with large open spaces and reinforced buildings that could withstand the dimensional effects of dragon presence. Trade flourished as the colony became a hub for frontier commerce because the Frontier Defense Coalition guaranteed safe passage for merchant ships traveling through member territories. Lisa found herself spending less time in combat situations and more time in diplomatic meetings because the coalition needed constant attention to prevent internal disputes. She discovered she had a talent for mediation because her reputation as a warrior made other species take her seriously, while her genuine desire for peace made them trust her intentions. One particular dispute nearly tore the coalition apart when 2 member species both claimed rights to a resource-rich asteroid field in neutral space. Lisa traveled to the contested region with several dragon riders and proposed they survey the asteroids together to determine fair division based on actual resources rather than historical claims. Both species agreed because refusing would make them seem unreasonable, and the survey revealed the asteroids contained enough resources for both civilizations to benefit without conflict. This success established a precedent for resolving disputes through cooperation rather than confrontation, and the coalition grew stronger as members learned to work together. But not all challenges came from external threats because the colony also faced internal problems as different groups of refugees brought conflicting cultural values. Some colonists believed dragon riders should form an elite class with special privileges because they provided protection, while others argued everyone contributed to the community in different ways. Lisa firmly opposed any hierarchy based on dragon bonding because she remembered how genetic discrimination felt, and she refused to create new forms of inequality. She implemented policies ensuring that dragon riders served in rotation, so no one became dependent on martial power for status, and all colonists had equal voice in governance. The real test came when Victor the engineer, who bonded with Void, proposed using dragon abilities for commercial purposes because stable wormholes could revolutionize interstellar transportation. Many coalition members were excited by the possibility of instant travel between systems, but the ancient Dragons expressed concern that commodifying dragon abilities would lead to exploitation. Lisa convened a special council including both ancient dragons and human riders to discuss the ethical implications, because this decision would set precedents for how dragon abilities were used. After weeks of debate, they established guidelines allowing limited commercial use of dragon abilities, but only when dragons freely consented and profits were shared with dragon sanctuaries. Victor agreed to these terms and began offering wormhole transport services for emergency medical situations and humanitarian missions, because that aligned with coalition values. The service saved countless lives as critically injured patients could be transported instantly to advanced medical facilities and refugee populations could be relocated from disaster zones. Meanwhile, the Korthax Dominion had not forgotten their defeat, and they pursued a different strategy, which was spreading propaganda claiming humans were manipulating dragons through genetic modification. The campaign found some traction among species who feared human expansion, and it created tension within the coalition as members questioned whether dragon bonds were truly voluntary. Lisa decided the best response was transparency, so she invited neutral observers from multiple species to study dragon bonding and determine whether riders were controlling their companions. The research team spent 6 months on Kepler-9, interviewing riders and dragons and using advanced sensors to study the mental connection between bonded pairs. Their final report concluded definitively that dragon bonds were mutual partnerships where both parties retained free will and could sever connection if they chose. The report also documented that dragons often made decisions contrary to rider wishes, and that the relationship functioned more like friendship than ownership. This finding undermined Korthax propaganda and actually strengthened coalition unity because now members had scientific evidence supporting the human dragon rider Model 5, years after Lisa first arrived on Kepler-9. Seeking isolation, the planet had become home to over 10,000 humans and hundreds of dragons. The colony exported not just protection services but also technology and philosophy, because other species wanted to learn the cooperation methods that made the coalition successful. Lisa was now 30 years old, and sometimes she felt ancient from the responsibilities she carried, but Ember and Frost remained constant companions, reminding her why she fought. She stood on a balcony overlooking the city, watching dragon riders training in the distance, and she thought about how much had changed since that first terrifying encounter with Commander Zyrax. The galaxy was far from perfect and many species still practiced oppression and exploitation, but the Frontier Defense Coalition had proven that cooperation could work. Smaller civilizations no longer faced bullying, alone because they had allies who would stand beside them, and dragon riders served as the visible symbol of that protection. Lisa received a message from Ambassador Corva, inviting her to visit the Vrelian homeworld for a historic occasion. Because the Empire was formally abolishing its occupation policies, the Vrelian government had concluded that maintaining control through force was unsustainable when species could join the coalition and gain protection against retaliation. Lisa accepted the invitation and traveled with a small delegation including Amy, whose maturity had grown tremendously over the years. The reception on Vrelian homeworld was formal and somewhat awkward because both sides remembered their violent history. But they were committed to building better future. Lisa addressed the Vrelian High Council, and she spoke about how conflict arose from fear and misunderstanding, but could be overcome through genuine effort to see other perspectives.